This lecture will provide a review for the first midterm, which will take us from the Paleolithic era in prehistory through the Ancient Aegean with the Minoans and Mycenaeans. The exam begins with 20 multiple choice questions that are taken from your handouts and the items that are not in bold that allow us to discuss, describe, and otherwise talk about works of art or other monuments. For instance, we would need to know the difference between the analytical techniques in art history of formal analysis, iconography, and iconology. Formal analysis is going to be the formal analyzing of a work of art, considering only those qualities that relate to its material, how it is shaped, and how it appears. So at this stage, we only talk about what it is, a painting, a sculpture, how big is it, what is it made of. At the second stage of analysis, or iconography, we have, with image writing, an interest in talking about the symbolism or the subject. So are we now looking at a pharaoh, such as Akhenaten here? How do we know we're looking at a pharaoh? Because of the Nimi's headdress, the ureocober of kingship, the false beard, holding the implements of Osiris, all of which remind us of the iconographic conventions of pharaohs in ancient Egypt. Finally, we have iconology, which is going to be the study of images and asks us about the cultural and historical context of when this was made. And so we find that in the Amarna period, we would point out that the pharaoh looks rather effeminate because of this androgynous style that is used for the ancient Egyptians at this time. Alternatively, there were three types of style that we discussed, such as with the Amarna style, we have the personal period and regional variations of these stylistic characteristics that relate works to a particular artist, a particular chronological era, or a region, as noted in these different variations. So either we have, say, a Praxitelean style with a personal style made by one artist, thus the characteristics relate to that individual. A particular period, like Neolithic or Amarna, relates to an era. And then finally, regional. So are we talking about a region of the Cyclades, for instance? And so the style that would be characteristic in that region. Now, composite view is the dominant way in which humans represented subjects going back to the earliest images, where we would have a combination of different viewing angles, most commonly frontal and profile views. This is the most obvious in ancient Egyptian art, where we find that the head, arms, and legs would be in profile, with the eye and the chest being frontal. The ancient Egyptians would also bury their dead, primarily in mastaba tombs, which is Arabic for bench, where we have this bench-shaped tomb with a serdab, or a room where we have an offering table and a place for people to pray to the deceased with their effigy. Now, down below, you would have a shaft sunken into the ground where the actual burial chamber would be. Bronze hollow casting, perfected in the Bronze Age, is going to find that artisans will create what they wish to represent in a more permanent material out of clay or terracotta. Then covering it in wax, they would melt that and replace it with a thin shell of bronze. Hence, we have a high tensile strength sculpture that is very durable thereafter. Now, the Amarna style, as noted, is going to be practiced during the reign of Akhenaten, the pharaoh who does away with all of the old pantheon to worship only Aton in his monotheistic religion. Hence, the characteristics of the Amarna style are androgyny, with the figures being shown attenuated or stretched out, elongated, if you will, with pursed full lips, with almond-shaped eyes, with large flowing hips and a high pinched waist. Now, bilateral symmetry is going to be the marker of beauty in many civilizations, even till today, whereby you can, like a butterfly or an insect, cut the figure down the vertical axis and fold it over, and it will be nearly identical on either side, hence bilaterally symmetrical. The post and lintel system is going to be the first dominant architectural system that will be carried from prehistory all the way through to ancient Rome until it was replaced by concrete. In this system, you're going to place a series of vertical posts that are going to hold up a horizontal lintel on top of them, which forms a rather functional roof system. So that can be seen here with the two vertical posts on the side supporting this central horizontal element above this woman. A necropolis, or literally city of the dead, is going to be a place where the dead continue living and are provided with all of the necessities that they need in the next life. So we find that many civilizations are going to have necropoli, not only the Egyptians, but say also the Etruscans and others, where entire homes and or cities are going to be built with furnishings for the dead. A relief sculpture is going to be practiced going back to prehistory and will take a flat background and have an artist chisel away at it to reveal or have it project forward from that background. There are different variations of relief sculpture from low to high. Polychrome is going to literally translate many colors and is most often referred to and used when talking about sculpture that is painted in encaustic in antiquity to look as lifelike as possible. The hierarchy of scale, otherwise known as hieratic scaling, is going to be the tradition whereby more important figures are going to be shown larger in different traditions. And this is true for humanity going back to the dawn of artwork. So here we find that gods, important rulers, and others are going to be shown much larger by scale. A votive offering in antiquity is very common and will be a gift given in gratitude to a deity. So these are going to be items that are given in thanks for the help of a deity, generally protecting them and or for a civilization helping them produce food, thus fertility. Speaking of fertility, going all the way back to the Paleolithic era, we have images of very robust and fecund women that are going to represent fertility and all of those aspects that go into the creation of life, such as exaggerating the size of breasts, the abdomen, the hips and thighs, and spending a great deal of time showing an inverted pubic triangle. All, of course, in the hopes of demonstrating that we can, through alliances in different tribes, ensure that life continues and new life is created. Commonly found in burials in the Neolithic period, entoptic images are hallucinogenic images that are going to prepare us or transition us from the land of the living to the land of the dead. They often include spirals and other hallucinogenic and or entoptic forms. Now, fresco secco or buon fresco are going to be different varieties of painting on lime plaster and is ideal for large wall murals. These can be found in tombs in ancient Egypt all the way through to the Sistine Chapel in the Renaissance. Now, fresco secco is going to be shown here and is common in ancient Egypt, for it is painting on dried lime plaster. Whereas buon fresco is going to be painting on wet lime plaster, thus we find the pigment is going to become part of the wall as it dries. The more durable of the two is buon fresco, hence the Italians refer to it as good fresh or good lime plaster painting. The next section of the exam was going to be comprised of slide identifications, unknowns, and significance. In this section, make your flashcards and know culture, title, and date for the various works that we discussed, and then the vocabulary associated with them. So for instance, you would, if being shown this image, be able to talk about the fact that it is part of prehistory, that it is going to be the nude woman or Venus of Willendorf, and was produced roughly between 28,000 and 25,000 BCE. The significance, of course, is that it is a fertility image. If we look at the pyramids of Giza as well, we note that it comes from ancient Egypt and that we have them being created between the 75-year period of 2551 and 2472 BCE. Thus, the significance is going to be they are tombs, relating them to the sun god Amun-Ra. You will have a series of works also that relate to unknown works. These are going to be images of or works from cultures that we looked at, but not examples that we saw in this class. But you should be able to extrapolate on the characteristics we've talked about thus far to identify them, such as pointing out that you know this is an Egyptian work because of the pose, how people are commonly shown, the hieroglyphics, and once again, the different traditions, such as the lion throne here, or the vulture crown, all of which can be tied to ancient Egypt. Now, finally, the slide comparison section is going to show two different works and ask you to identify the culture that they derive from. In each essay, one should always begin with formal analysis in the tripartite investigative approach of art history. This is where we discuss the style. We analyze the forms of the objects. How big or small are they? Is it Egyptian or Sumerian? How do we know that? Then we talk about the iconography, or the meaning or content. That being, what does the work represent? A god, a ruler, some other supernatural being? What does the form relate to? What is its function? Is it a tomb? Is it a temple? What exactly does it mean? Finally, what is the iconological context? That being, what are the circumstances surrounding its creation, and what does that tell us about the civilization that created it? Now, each question will be the same, asking you to identify works of the representative cultures or periods and how you know that. So you will be shown a work that is either going to be from the prehistoric, Near East, Egyptian, or Aegean periods that we talked about. With that, you should consider the history of these regions, their major beliefs, and their rulers. So are they ruled by a priest king, a shaman, a pharaoh? Are they an oligarchy, a monarchy? What type of gods do they believe in? And then finally, the popular motifs and iconography associated with each region. So for instance, the Venus of Willendorf we would point out as prehistoric or Paleolithic more specifically. The subject is of a large nude woman with the technique used to carve out this stone. The presentation, of course, is one of an anonymous woman, so we find that we are not focusing on individuality, and it would be used as a way in which to cement these allegiances between tribes in this prehistoric, unforgiving time. If we turn to Stonehenge, again, we would talk about the post and lintel system being used here with these megalithic stones, these massive stones that are arranged into a circle that are used as an astronomical device or calendar. It also is going to be surrounded by cremated bodies, and so represents the transition to the land of the dead. Turning to the Victory Stele of Naram Sin, we would have an Akkadian example, or Near Eastern, whereby a new type of ruler who is shown godlike wears these crowns with horns, with a composite view, carrying every weapon imaginable at the time. Thus he is in the pose of a ruler with two suns sanctioning his actions above, or God sanctioning his action. If we turn to the ziggurat, you're going to have a platform for a temple in the ancient Near East, whereby we have this elevator to the heavens, where we have waiting rooms on top for gods to appear and us to appease them with votive figures. Thus we find that it tells us a great deal about the organization of the culture, their belief system, where the gods are, and why the priestly class is going to be at the top of this hegemonic political structure. With the Workaways, we have one that is Sumerian from the Near East, in which we have the entire civilization outlined from the crops and the cattle below that the goddess allows to grow and supports life, thus feeding the naked men in the middle who carry votive offerings of baskets of food to deliver to Inanna at the top, whereby this priest king is going to be united in matrimony with the goddess. The ancient Egyptian example here from the early dynastic period shows the establishment of ancient Egypt with a characteristic composite view. We find that the iconography shows the pharaoh in this striking pose with this type of mace about to end the life of this captive, whereby we see the same happening with Horus, this falcon bird, because he is the pharaoh incarnate. He is going to be the living god, while the mother of the pharaohs above, Hathor, watches on and is going to ensure that divine righteous retribution and justice is going to prevail on earth. Turning to the Old Kingdom, as far as the seated statues of the pharaohs, again with a falcon-headed god behind his head. We have the pharaoh shown with a Nemes headdress, a false beard, hands rigidly to the side, right hand in a fist, seated on a lion throne with intertwining series of vegetation from Upper and Lower Egypt, showing he rules both and is as permanent as the stone that he sits on that glows blue, the color of Horus, when the light hits it. Finally, the Old Kingdom here of the pyramids are going to remind us that the pyramid type is from the shape of a bin-bin, which relates to the worship of Amun-Ra, the sun god, at Heliopolis. Thus, the tombs that the pyramids actually function as are going to be solar symbols that relate the pharaohs to Amun-Ra and make possible their regeneration and their transition to the next life all the more easy. And more streamlined in this fashion. Thus, we still are associating them with the gods because when they die, they must go through these different gates in order to rise up back to the sun to be reborn. For the Minoans we have here in the Ancient Aegean, we have a style that appreciates, again, this funneled type of energy with these pinched waists and this undulating organic motion. Because, of course, they are a seafaring maritime trading empire, we find that the association with pelagic or oceanic life forms is going to be quite commonly found. The subjects often are going to relate to bull worship and or ceremonies involving bulls. They spread these motifs throughout the Mediterranean. So prepare by reviewing your notes, looking at the study guide, and being ready for the midterm by the end of the week. Should you have any questions, feel free to reach out to your instructor.